Hi, everyone. This is Justin Stofron with another edition of You're Probably Getting Screwed interviews. And this week's guest is Basel Musharbash, and I'm excited to have him on. I'll make a quick plug. We're going to be talking about private equity today, but I'll make a quick plug for Basil's incredible work over at Farm Action. But with that, Basil, wanted to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself.
Hey, thanks, Justin. Thanks for having me. Glad to be with you as always. My name is Basel Musharbash. As you said, I'm an antitrust and trade regulation attorney. I have a firm called Anti-Monopoly Counsel that focuses on anti-monopoly policy advocacy and anti-monopoly litigation, impact litigation as well. And I work closely with Farm Action on a lot of their work, their great anti-monopoly work in the agricultural supply chain.
Well, so the reason I wanted to chat with you today, though, is you wrote a piece recently in Matt Stoller's Substack Big about private equity in the fire truck manufacturing industry and how it may have or how it contributed to the challenges that LA had in fighting the wildfires recently, as well as just increased costs for local governments around.
Across the board. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And so for just some big picture context for folks who aren't familiar, can you talk about what a private equity roll-up is and how, if you have thoughts on how private equity investment maybe differs from other kinds of investment?
Yeah. So private equity investment differs from other types of investment in that it's not like you have an operating business, um, and it's more that they aggregate money from private sources, and they want to make as much return on it as possible as quickly as possible. And so when they, put money into a company, when they buy it up, they're not necessarily looking at, building a great business for the long term. They're looking for how to create value for their shareholders quickly. And that could involve things like, you know, uh, creating arrangements with the company that allow the private equity fund, the private equity owners to extract as much, capital dividends and money out of the operating company as possible as profits for themselves. It could involve, slashing costs in an unsustainable way or raising prices in an unsustainable way in a bid to, boost the sort of the short term, uh, profits of the company, which might make it, more attractive to a new buyer. Um, and in that way allow the private equity company to cash out. But unfortunately, that's not necessarily going to be the best approach for that business or for its customers or for its employees. So that's a little bit of the difference between private equity and other types of investment. And what, a lot of one particular sort of favorite strategy of private equity funds to, you know, create this sort of increase in the value of a company really quickly is the roll up. And what that looks like basically is that instead of just buying one company in a particular line of business, the private equity fund gets together a bunch of money and buys up, most of the competitors in a market, and then jacks up the price because there's no competition anymore. Suddenly, there's one dominant firm in this market. It's charging much higher prices. It's making a lot more profit. Uh, it can probably get away with degrading the quality of its product, so it can cut costs that way. And that ultimately can be good for the private equity owners because suddenly they can, they're extracting cash flow, a lot more free cash flow from that company. they can sell that company as a dominant firm now for much more money, but it's not good for anybody else. And that's
Mhm.
basically what, these private equity funds have done throughout our economy for, the last 20, 30 years, with one of the more striking and frankly appalling examples being in the fire truck industry.
Yeah. So, you know, I'm interested if you can just kind of, walk through a little bit of like what you found doing the research for this story. I'm curious as to how it even sort of struck you to dig into this,
Yeah.
and then also you know I'll maybe let you go for a little bit. But so one of the things that really struck me about what you found was the way that firms targeted these smaller manufacturers that were sort of looking for succession, looking to get out. Because I've seen that. I have a hardware chain here in the Twin Cities that used to be an Ace hardware chain, and they have since sold to this group in, I think they're based out of Tennessee, this private equity backed group that basically goes around and they very specifically, like their CEO is set, they look for hardware chains that are looking to get out, to move on, and they keep all the same. It's not Ace brand anymore, but it's the same previous owner's brand name and that sort of thing. So they keep all the old names as well.
Yeah.
I was struck by some of those similarities in the piece, but yeah, I'll let you
Yeah.
take it away.
No, it's very similar to what you're describing. The way I got into this is that it was funny. Somebody was tweeting about how we don't have small fire trucks in the U.S. And I thought that why isn't there a small fire truck, right? Like there seems to be like maybe there's a market for that, and you'd think that there would be small fire trucks on offer. And so I thought, well, maybe consolidation is behind it. Maybe that's what it is. And that's where and I started and that's where I started digging in. But it's part of a broader thing that I've been interested in, which is looking at consolidation and roll ups in municipal procurement. We're seeing this across the board. It's not just fire trucks. We're seeing the same thing in ambulances. We're seeing the same thing in buses. We're seeing the same thing in utility trucks and software for local governments. Uh, and in many ways, the roll-ups emulate what you described with the hardware stores, where they buy up all the different providers, and in some cases, they sort of create a new identity. But in a lot of cases, they keep the names. They keep the brands so that it looks like you have multiple companies operating in the market, but actually it's all led from one center. And and that's exactly what happened in the fire truck manufacturing industry. To sort of give folks a background on the industry and sort of how it used to operate, so that you have something to compare what we have today to. The modern fire truck industry started like in the 50s and 60s, came into its own in those decades. You had, strong protections, strong antitrust enforcement that made it so that um, small manufacturers couldn't be excluded from markets by dominant manufacturers. You also had regulations in place that made it so that a small manufacturer could ship in steel for its trucks uh, at at competitive rates with the largest players. The railroads couldn't give preferential, unjustified rates to the big players. Uh, and so that allowed a massive industry of fire truck manufacturers to emerge, where you had local plants pop up around the country. Local manufacturers, mostly family owned, would just pop up to serve. the, you know, local fire departments, regional fire departments, and they would tailor their products to the needs of those fire departments. You know, the you know the striking thing about fire departments is that not a you know almost no fire department is like any other. Each of them has their own infrastructure. They deal with different problems, um, and they need to have fire trucks and equipment that are tailored to that to make sure that the firefighters are safe and that they can respond effectively to fires and disasters. So they, so you had this great, uh, you know, small business industry in fire truck manufacturing for a long time. I told you about how they are, how older fire trucks need more repairs. Well, Rev Group and Oshkosh have pioneered the strategy, and we're gonna have a I'm gonna have an article about this with Matt here in the next week or so. Um, they innovated the strategy in the last decade or so, where they use little tricks to make it so that fire departments can't source um, replacement parts from other vendors. Um, they've used warranty terms and other sort of design elements to make it so that it's harder for fire departments to repair their equipment in house, um, and forcing fire departments to use dealers for their repairs or directly owned repair centers uh, by the manufacturers. And that is making replacement parts that used to cost $1,000 in 2019. One fire department mechanic told me are now costing $8,000.
Wow.
So suddenly, fire departments are struggling with readiness because their fire trucks are getting older and they can't replace them because the cost has doubled or tripled. Um, there's breaking down, and the breakdowns are costing a hell of a lot more to fix. So suddenly you're seeing, fire departments are seeing their maintenance budgets go up 30%, 40% every year. Um, and, money doesn't grow on trees. So the more they're spending on fire trucks and maintenance, the less they're spending on firefighter salaries, the less they're spending on, you know, mental health counseling and health benefits for their firefighters. So it's causing a crisis of preparedness at fire departments around the country. We've seen articles about this everywhere from Seattle to LA, Houston to Atlanta, small towns in Kansas and Pennsylvania. It's hitting everybody, and it's endangering the public. Really.
Well, that is, one thing I can say from my experience is where there's a monopoly over manufacturing, there's likely a monopoly over repair. So that doesn't shock me.
Yeah.
Uh, I I really appreciate you taking the time, Basil, to come on and chat about this. I encourage everyone to go read the article from the other week and keep your eyes peeled for the coming one on repair. Um, and of course, go to Farm Action's website. There's all sorts of good reports and data and stuff that Basil has worked on. Yeah, with that, thanks so much.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.